And so we're going to be talking about the U.S. and Israel airstrikes on Iran and really what has happened since in the early
Yeah.
hours of Saturday. So, Mike, we're talking for the first time
Yes.
about this. So I would love to just start with when you heard the news, what your reaction was.
Well, first, thanks for having me. Good to see you. I cannot notice that you have a cold, so don't worry about
Okay,
your voice.
thank you.
Um, the buildup was obvious, so it wasn't like it was a shock. It wasn't like a surprise, like it was last June when they did. That was a surprise attack. You can't have that many soldiers and that many boats and ships and airplanes in one place and just keep them there forever. But I have to say, I wasn't surprised, but I was disappointed. I just, I served in the US government for 5 years, proudly, 3 years at the White House with President Obama, 2 years in Moscow. And I've studied American history, American foreign policy. My last book starts in the 18th century, just for everybody who knows. So I've studied US foreign policy since the beginning of our republic. And it is my firm conviction that war is sometimes necessary, and we've known that in our history, but it always has to be the last resort, the last instrument of American power when all the others are exhausted and our backs are up against the wall, and either we've been attacked or we're about to be attacked. Imminent threat, that's what we call it in terms of when a preemptive war is legitimate. And this war didn't have any of those features. We were not about to be attacked by a nuclear weapon from Iran because Iran doesn't have a nuclear weapon. We were not about to be attacked by an ICBM from Iran because Iran does not have an ICBM. It doesn't have a ballistic missile, an intercontinental ballistic missile that can attack the United States. Um, Iran was not about to attack, to the best of my knowledge, and here I want to emphasize that our soldiers in the area or our embassies. And so I just don't, there was no imminent threat. We just obliterated all their nuclear system in
Well,
June, after all, right? So come on, guys, you got it. One of these two stories is not true. You can't tell us you obliterated it and eliminated it for a decade into the future, something to that effect. That's what they said, and ridiculed our Iran nuclear deal that we negotiated, that President Obama negotiated in 2015 and kept for a decade the Iranians from obtaining a nuclear weapon, and could have lasted a lot longer had we tried diplomacy. And then tell us, we're under a threat right away. So my second reaction was deep disappointment. And especially because I know the Constitution and everybody should know our rights. It says right in the Constitution that Congress declares war, not the President of the United States. Now, I know all examples where that did not happen, and we can go through them if one is interested. But this is the first time that a president went to war without either the Senate on their side or the UN Security Council or NATO. President Trump just did it without any discussion. And to this day, we don't really know what the objectives of this war are. We'll get to that in a minute. That just doesn't feel right to me as an American. And I also think it's bad politics. I'm not an expert on American politics. I'm just an observer and consumer. But if things go bad, you want the senators to vote for you like they did with President Bush in 2003. I was against that war, but we had a deliberation. 77 senators voted for it. A majority of Americans supported it when we launched that invasion. Oh, and by the way, 4 dozen countries also supported us. What's striking about this one, no debate in the US Senate. American public opinion, maybe it's changed by now, but before was against this war. And we didn't go to war with a dozen partners and allies. We went to war with one partner and ally, Israel. That's a very different context compared to the war in Iraq. So disappointment that we're not following our own democratic rules of the game.
I thought it was confusing to me anyway as an observer because, yes, we did see the military buildup, Mike, happening in the region. At the same time, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner were ostensibly involved in these negotiations in
Yes.
Geneva with the Iraqi foreign minister the Iranian foreign minister. And I think that I don't know. I was lulled into this sense that this was more of a show of force, while at the
Yes.
to put pressure on these negotiations. So what do you
Yeah.
think happened with the negotiations? Why did they unravel, or do you know the backstory of why they weren't working?
Well, first, you're not the only one that was lulled. Lots of experts that I know were lulled, and most certainly the supreme leader of Iran was lulled because they had that meeting that they all got killed at. I think had they been a little more cautious and thought that those negotiations weren't working, that might not have happened. And I think that may be the explanation. We don't know the details yet, right? It's too early to tell. But when I look at those negotiations, I'm a former ambassador. I've negotiated with a tough country, Russia, and some others. You don't get hard deals done in just a couple of weeks. They didn't try very hard. Let's be clear. By the way, we didn't have our top negotiators who really know Iran at the table. We had two business people from New York. I don't know either of them, but they don't seem particularly qualified to negotiate with Iran, not least when they're just crossing the street from negotiating with the Russians and the Ukrainians. Like, these are hard jobs. One person can't do it all. They didn't even have a direct meeting with the Iranians. They only had an intermediary. And hard negotiations take time. So when I look at it now in retrospect, I think that was just a pretext and maybe to lull the Iranians so that we could get a good shot at them. And of course, the Israelis did.
Someone said perhaps negotiations were a decoy, and
Yes.
I think that's exactly what you were
Yes.
saying. In today's Substack, I thought it was so interesting because you and I are contemporaries in age, and I've covered the same things that you were inside the White House working on.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
you used history as your guide to talk about the removal of these despots and dictators and terrible people. And I think you repeat a line saying that this should always be celebrated. On the other hand, you talk about Saddam Hussein's and the statue coming down. Of course, many of us remember that well, or Hosni Mubarak, and now the Ayatollah. And yet, you talk about that the end of dictatorships rarely leads, this is a quote from you, the end of dictatorships rarely leads smoothly to the emergence of democracy. So, can you just tell us that thought? Because you also use other revolutions when you're talking
Yes.
about this as well. Can you
Yeah.
put that in context for us and elaborate on it?
Yeah, sure. And first, then my third reaction to what happened, right, and the list of the roller coaster of emotions was elation. I want to be clear about that. Khamenei is a bad guy. He killed a lot of people, a lot of innocent people. That regime has done a lot of damage to close personal friends of mine, Iranian Americans here in the United States. Um, and and nobody should lose any sleep over the fact that he is no longer terrorizing his people. And I say in the piece, and I say this to my kids, the day Mubarak fell in 2011, I was working at the White House. I was at the National Security Council. The people of Egypt, they led that revolution, of course, that peaceful revolution. But we played a role. We helped in to help push Mubarak out and a peaceful transition without any soldiers lost, without any of the drama that we're already into. And that night, just to give you a little color. So I'm not an expert on the Middle East, of course, but I am an expert. I've been teaching about here at Stanford on democratic transitions and revolutions for 30 years. That's a course I've been teaching for a long time. So when the Arab Spring began to happen, I got pulled in with our group on Tunisia and Egypt to give this kind of comparative historical context. And just for the Stanford, if you have any Stanford followers out there, we're called Nerd Nation here at Stanford. I was called when I would send these missives in from this transitions from the democracy literature. One of my colleagues started calling me the Nerd Directorate because the NSC is organized by directorates. His name is Dennis McDonough, by the way. He later became the president's chief of staff. He said, "Oh, here we go again, another missive from the Nerd Directorate." But uh, we that was a euphoric moment, and I had friends of mine. One of them I later taught a course, Amr Hamzawi, on Tahrir Square, communicating with them, and I said to all my friends in the White House, "We have to celebrate this because we don't know what will come next." And I told my kids that we got to celebrate because we don't know what will come next, right? And I tell that context because one can celebrate the end of these horrible people, and also want to ask the question, what's the plan here, folks? What's your game plan? Because the president of the United States, not Mike McFaul talking to you here on Substack, but the president of the United States, in explaining why he went to war, called on the Iranian people to rise up. He called them to overthrow their regime. He called for revolution. He called for regime change. And then the next day, he doubled down on it.
And then
And
today, the Secretary of War, which so lame that he insists on being called that, but Pete Hegseth said regime change was not the goal. So
yes,
who's on first?
well, that's a great point. And I just think they are not coordinated. They don't have an interagency process. Maybe that was him rolling back what the president of the United States said, but he literally only said it 24 hours earlier. And I just think that's irresponsible. You know, negotiating a transition to democracy is always hard, and for external actors to play a positive role, but it's not impossible. It's happened before, and we have helped other transitions. And I talk about that in my piece, and we can
But
talk
but
about it
but
very
but it's
closely.
pretty they're pretty few and far between.
Yes.
And I
And
want to go
rarely
back
with
to
military force, rarely with military force. That's a really important thing. The successful cases, I think of Poland, 1989. I think of apartheid South Africa, negotiating with the ANC. In Ukraine in 2004, that was a negotiated transition. And even the fall of Mubarak, that was a peaceful, negotiated transition that we played a facilitating role in the background. Rarely, however, does it happen after the use of military force.
Okay, and tell us why. Tell us why a transition to a democracy as a result of removing a dictatorship militarily is so problematic.
Well, because a place like Iran has had this theocracy for decades. Let's just be clear. They've been there for a long time. They're deeply entrenched in the society, the IGRC, the mullahs, the banyards that support them in terms of money. Um, and so just decapitating the supreme leader, that doesn't destroy the whole regime. That's number one. Military, let's not forget them. Intelligence agencies, let's not forget them. But second, because it's been so oppressive for so long, who represents the other side in a negotiation, right? I mentioned these other cases. In Poland, we had Solidarity. They'd been around for a long time. South Africa, they had the African National Congress. They've been around for decades. They had a leader in jail, Nelson Mandela, right? There was a structure there, and Iran is missing that internally. Now, there is the crown prince, right? The son of the Shah. He lives in the United States for a long time, and he has boldly stated that he's willing to serve as a transitional figure. And I applaud him for that, by the way. You can't just replace one dictatorship with another dictatorship. But I don't have any sense as to what his public support is inside Iran. And to date, I haven't seen any connection that he has with the Trump administration or any negotiations that he's had with elements of the regime that's in place right now. The most successful transitions are ones when tragically, but necessarily, is a negotiation between some elements of the old dictatorship and some representatives from civil society. Those, we call them pacted transitions, right? And nobody likes that. It means you have to deal with these creepy crawlers. Pinochet, there was a pacted transition in Chile, and Pinochet got to be senator for decades because you have to sacrifice. But right now, I don't see any effort to try to bring those two sides together from the Trump administration. I hope there's some secret plan going on that
In
we haven't
fact,
seen.
I wanted to quote you because that's what I was going to go to. You said, because I asked Richard Haas the same question
Mm.
on Saturday morning, or was it Sunday morning? I guess Saturday. Anyway, I was asking him, is there a possibility that that something is going on? In other words, taking some of the old order and some of the new order and having them work together to bring in a new democracy. And you wrote Gosh, great minds, Mike. What can I say? Maybe they have a secret plan for undermining the theocracy still deeply entrenched inside Iran, despite the successful capitulation of its leadership over the weekend. Maybe the White House, CIA, and State Department are quietly communicating with potential leaders of Iranian civil society, both inside and outside the country. Successful transitions, as you just mentioned, to democracy often require a pact between defectors from the old dictatorship and moderate forces from the democratic movement. I mean, you say maybe. How likely is that? Do you think that the Trump administration is adept at actually figuring out this sort of peaceful transition to a democracy? Do you think that they've thought that through? I guess there's no way of you really saying yes or no, but if your best guess would be what?
Well, I just want to underscore that there are cases where that's happened in the past. The fall of Milosevic back in 2000 in Serbia. We later learned that there were these quiet negotiations and even monetary assistance to the student groups, Otpor, that helped to bring down that dictator. The case I know well, Mubarak, we definitely had quiet communications with the generals in Egypt, and to help make that a peaceful transition so that it would be evolutionary change, not revolutionary change. And then it failed 2 years later. I want to admit that didn't work. Even that didn't work. But I'm skeptical for a couple of reasons. One, President Trump, while he's been president for 5 years, has never shown any interest in supporting democracy abroad anywhere. Not anywhere. Let's just be clear about that. So, there are his cheerleaders out there in the news saying we're going to finally liberate the people of Iran. But where has he ever done that? He most certainly doesn't show that enthusiasm to help the Belarusian opposition or the Russian opposition or the Chinese human rights activists, or even in Venezuela. He arrested Maduro and now he's negotiating with the Maduro regime. So that makes me skeptical on the first blush. By the way, he's not that supportive of democracy here at home. So the idea that he's going to be this great champion, I'm just not sure that's his instincts. And secondly, they're already starting to talk differently. I mean, it's only been 3 or 4 days, and you already see them rolling back these bigger aspirations, and that makes me, that leads me to believe that in fact he's not serious about it. He just says, "You guys go do it." We took out the supreme leader. Now you rise up and take over. That's not a strategy. That's a strategy for more people getting killed in Iran.
And in fact, as you mentioned, a negotiation, he's reportedly told Michael Shear of The Atlantic, they want to talk and I've agreed to talk, so I will be talking to them. At the same time, I saw Iran's top national security official, Ali Larijani, I don't know if that's
Yep.
how you say it,
Yeah, that's good.
vowed, quote, we will not negotiate with the United States.
Right.
So, is the president being bombastic here about this negotiation effort? And it doesn't sound very realistic, does it?
No, it doesn't. And then it gets back to where we started this conversation. Like, if we had to, I'm speculating, of course. I don't have any contact with President Trump, right? He's not asking me for advice. Even though when I was in the government, we asked all kinds of people for advice about transitions during the Arab Spring. I don't sense that he's interested in that. And most certainly not from me. Let's just be clear about that. But I think he threw that out there because I don't think they feel a little nervous about the other arguments. There was, if this is not about liberating the people of Iran, then what was it about? Imminent threat wasn't there. Nuclear weapons, they don't have them. ICBMs to attack us, not there. Even there's been leaking of the intelligence reporting that shows that that's like a decade away. So then, Mr. President, why did we go to war? Why have American soldiers now died in combat? And I think we deserve an answer to that. I think
And what do you
the
think the
American people do.
administration would say? What do you think the administration would say?
They keep changing their argument, right? As you pointed out, the latest one today, just a few hours ago, and I haven't had a chance to read all the news because I have this day job here at Stanford. But the latest one was, well, Iran was going to attack, and we knew that if Iran attacked, we would be attacked. So we decided we would join Iran in preemptively or preventively, depending on what adverb you want to use, attack Iran. But man, oh man, really? So Iran now gets to decide when we go to war, and I want to defend. Excuse me, Israel gets to defend. I want Israel to protect their national security interests. I have nothing against that. I want us to be close with them. But why do they get to decide when we go to war when the U.S. Senate and the American people were not read into that? And, maybe this will just last for 24 hours and they'll walk away from this one. But that's literally just what Secretary Rubio said a couple of hours ago. I don't think that's a good reason to go to war. I think we go to war when all other means, I want to emphasize this, when all other means have been exhausted and there's nothing more we can do, that's when we go to war. And it just doesn't feel like we exhausted all the means to protect ourselves against an alleged threat from the Iranian regime.
This seems to be sort of consistent with this might makes right
Yes.
philosophy, foreign policy philosophy of the Trump administration.
Yes.
As I mentioned to Richard on Saturday, like this muscular foreign policy that,
Yeah.
um, kind of eschews or poo-poos negotiation in favor for a show of military strength.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
it almost seems a weird, I mean, I don't mean to psychoanalyze the president, but a weird extension of his personality and his ego and his superiority complex kind of playing out in foreign policy.
Well, again, you know the president and followed him closer than I have, so I'll let you comment on his psychological state of being. But to your broader point, yes, the president, and I want to emphasize. Remember, like he's the guy that promised us no more forever wars and all you neocon regime changers. We're not going to do that. That's what he promised his MAGA base, and now he's done this. And all these people now support him. It's kind of odd. Like I guess it's just whatever Trump says is the right thing to do. Like I can't. It's kind of odd. We'll come back to that maybe later. But he has now. He likes to use the American military, right? He liked that operation in Venezuela. He liked bombing in Nigeria, and I just think he kind of likes the fact that he can use military power in this way that makes him look strong. But I want to emphasize, as somebody who worries about American national security, not Trump's image in the world, this in the long term does not enhance our security. We look like a bunch of cowboys here. We look like we don't care about the rules of the game. We're just going to do whatever we want. And you can do that for a while, and you can most certainly do that against weaker countries. But the rest of the world doesn't like this. They look at us and they're like, well, how is this any different than what Putin did in Ukraine? That's the question I'm getting from others around the world. Like Mike, you're out there yelling and screaming about how evil this was and how awful this was. Tell me how your war in Iran is different. And I can answer that question, right? One's a democracy, one's a dictatorship, but I could go through the list. But to casual observers, it doesn't look that way. That's the first one. This is not a popular war around the world. Iran's making a huge mistake. The Iranians are making a huge mistake by killing civilians in the Middle East. I don't understand that strategy, but so that helps us a bit. That's the first problem. Second problem, for actually three administrations now, beginning with the Obama administration, we called it the pivot to Asia, and then Trump one did the same thing. And then Biden even did it in a much more comprehensive way. And the idea was we need to shift our military forces and focus to Asia to deal with the Chinese threat. And we have to get out of the Middle East and shift to Asia. And what are they doing here? Exactly the opposite. We're
Well,
just
in
putting
fact,
all of
in
our
fact,
military back into the Middle East. And one more footnote on this. Let's get into the weeds on it. There's something called the Patriot Missile Defense System, right? very useful system. We should have been developing this a long time ago. There's the long story as to why the U.S. Army decided to go with different systems. But I can tell you, I just talked to a bunch of Ukrainians 2 weeks ago in Munich. They have these Patriot systems, and there's a giant deficit of interceptors. And you know what? There's also the Taiwanese want these interceptors, and our European allies want these interceptors. And now we're making a war of choice where we're using up a lot of these interceptors. So very concretely, we don't have unlimited PAC-3s. They're called. That's the interceptors. We don't have an unlimited supply. We make like 600 a year. It's zero sum. You use them here. That means you don't get to use them in Asia or Europe.
I was also surprised that Trump didn't rule out sending ground troops to Iran, which sounds absolutely insane to me, but
Yes.
does it
Yes,
to
I'm with
you?
you on that too. I also, I mean, I don't know what psychological thing he's doing there, but wow. I mean, this is a giant country, 93 million people. Everybody go look at a map after we're done here. Compare it to Iraq versus Iran. Look at the population centers. Well, I just hope it's more bluster. Let's not get ahead of our skis yet. But with that, he did not rule it out. That was surprising to me. I got to tell you honestly.
Can you talk about, I mean, I hate to keep going back, but I just think it's so instructive to talk about, and I covered it and went there a number of times, and walked around with General Petraeus after the
Yeah.
surge, but, how Iraq, while much smaller, can really be a case in point in terms of the difficulty of transitioning a country like this, a theocracy that's been in existence, what, for gosh, 25, no, 45 years, right? Since the
Yes.
fall
Yeah.
of the Shah. Um, but you look at Iraq today and it is in not great shape, right?
That's right. According to Freedom House, it's an unfree country 2 decades after we invaded. And let's just go through that comparison a little bit more in depth. Like, number one, we did have boots on the ground, obviously, in Iraq. They did have a plan. I think some people say they had no plan. That's not true. It just didn't work. That's different. But they were planning. We occupied the place. We ran the place for a while. We brought in advisors on democracy. One of them is a colleague of mine here at the Hoover Institution. Larry Diamond is his name, and I know the story. Larry didn't support the war, but when called by his country to go serve, he's one of our world's best experts on democracy. Just so everybody knows, read everything he written. In fact, he wrote a book called "Squandered Victory" after his time there. So they were trying, and yet it didn't. Took a long time, and then wars, you collapse the old order. Sometimes instead of smooth transition to democracy, you get civil war. And that's what happened in Iraq. You get counterinsurgencies, you get fighting. That could happen in Iran. We should be very careful. Like my friends were all saying hallelujah, the ding dong, the witch is dead on Saturday, right? With my Iranian American friends. And we saw those demonstrations that were inspiring to me of Iranians demonstrating. They were happy that the supreme leader was killed by us, but there were other demonstrations. Go look at the photos of Isfahan, that giant square. Maybe those people were all just paid, but maybe not. Maybe they did support the supreme leader, and we just need to be careful about when we break things that it's really hard to get to the other side.
I Martin Vasquez, who is part of our paid subscription team, mentioned about Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, whose name I had to learn to say when I was anchoring the CBS Evening News.
Yeah, yeah,
So I
that's a
always said,
mouthful. Yes.
I'm a dinner jacket," is how I have Ahmadinejad. But he was killed too.
Yeah, yeah, he was. And
He
and
was a
and
bad dude, though, Mike. I
he
remember
was
he
bad.
was a Holocaust denier and
Yes,
really awful person in his members only jacket. I remember I interviewed him when he came to the UN. He was a scary guy.
he was a scary guy. I agree. And just so you know, I've been a part of a team here at Stanford that has run a project called the Iran Democracy Project since 2002. So we've been engaged in this. I actually went to Iran in 2003 when under Khatami. That was the opening time. He was kind of the Gorbachev, and it was a fantastic trip, by the way. Amazing people, and even back then, they all wanted to talk to me. I was the only American in the group because they wanted regime change. And I also studied and taught in Poland in the late '80s. And it reminded me a lot of in Poland in the '80s under communist rule, everybody that I met seemed to be against this regime. So 20 years of this tyranny, I want this place to live in freedom, but they're going to need help. They just can't do it on their own. And I really worry that we're not committed to that cause. I hope I'm wrong. And I'm going to keep an open mind. I hope there's things going on quietly that would allow these people to live in freedom. Because if they do, and I wrote another piece about this before, if Iran is a democracy, they'll become one of our closest allies in the region. We won't have to worry about nuclear weapons and support for terrorism. So that long-term strategic objective should have always been our goal. Um, but I'm just not, I just don't see the evidence that we're focused on it right now.
Yeah,
But I
and
hope I'm
by the
wrong.
way, I should give Ben Rhodes credit because I think I was parroting what he wrote in the Times today. He wrote an op-ed and he said, "Mr. Trump." I think this is where I got this sort of sense. Mr. Trump now regularly uses the military as an extension of his personal instincts. He may
Yes.
try to keep the operation short. That won't stave off the consequences. Whatever happens in the coming weeks, the U.S. has extended its post 9/11 forever war into Iran, an act that will reverberate across the Middle East for years to come. So, I mean,
That's a smart phrase. Ben's a friend of mine. I agree with him. And I would even go a step further, Katie. I would say what we're seeing even more broadly. We're seeing the personalization of American national security and foreign policy. When you look around the world, it's all about what's in it for Trump and Trump's friends, and even sometimes his family, right? And I just think this personalization of diplomacy and war is very dangerous. We should have an interagency process where people debate what is in America's national interest, and then the American people, through our elected representatives in Congress, should be a part of that process. And I think this is a dangerous moment when just one person wielding military power, economic power. It's the same with tariffs. It's the same on all kinds of things. Somebody runs an ad in a province of Canada that he doesn't like, and he slaps on a 10% new tariff. That's all about Trump personally. That's not about the president of the United States of America, the commander in chief, and our federal government, which is supposed to serve us, not the interests of individual leaders.
also, this war is not inexpensive, is it, Mike? I mean, depending on how long it lasts, I forget the estimates I've seen. We're talking about billions of dollars at a
Yes.
time where there are plenty of problems here at home. And, we often hear about blood and treasure, human lives and the financial costs of an undertaking like this. But when I think about treasure, I wonder about the treasures that may lay in wait in Iran for the most corrupt administration, I think, what many have called the most corrupt administration in our nation's history. And this effort to kind of benefit financially and economically and in terms of expanding whatever empire this must be among Trump officials, the family and his cronies and fellow businessmen. Um, do you see the possibility of, without it being stated, obviously publicly, uh, a desire to take advantage of a country that can be shaped in Donald Trump's image?
Well, I most certainly hope not. And I haven't seen any, serious reporting to that effect yet. Let's emphasize that word and let's keep talking about this. I can say from other places where he's involved That's exactly how other leaders have figured out the way to deal with President Trump. Delcy Rodriguez in Venezuela. I want to emphasize Maduro was overthrown. His vice president is the leader of Venezuela. That happened 2 months ago. It's the same regime, and they're talking about all kinds of business deals now. That's exactly what they're doing. Russia. What did Putin do to change the way we were talking about the war in Ukraine? It was brilliant. I got to give him credit. He changed the parameters of the conversation so that it became not just about Ukraine, but it was about business deals in Russia. And one number was floated. They allegedly they said we have $12 trillion worth of business deals that we can do. And you know who's at the table? Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner. They're two business people. And you know who's on the other side of the table? Kirill Dmitriev. I know Kirill. He's a business guy. He's the head of the Russian investment fund. He's not a general. He's not a diplomat. And when you get two business groups, two business groups negotiating about $12 trillion in deals, that's what they're talking about. They're not talking about the people in Ukraine. And so I hope we don't see that repeated in this case, but it is definitely the way that other leaders have gotten the attention of the White House is to throw, billions and billions and billions of investment deals their way.
Yeah. I just kind of Googled this just for fun, because you said there hasn't been that's much reporting. I think Jed Legum wrote something on Substack about this, and we're trying to talk to him.
Oh,
But
so there is reporting. I just haven't seen it. Good for you.
yeah, it says analysis. This is the AI overview. I just think it's kind of interesting. And then I'm going to let you go, Mike. And then I'm going to go take a nap because I'm still fighting this cold, you
Okay.
guys. It sucks. All right. Analysis of the potential for U.S. or allied military action against Iran often highlight a combination of geopolitical, security, and economic factors. While the immediate justification for conflict is typically framed around security issues, such as Iran's nuclear program or support for regional proxies, the underlying strategic goals are widely understood to include significant economic and financial interests.
Well, there you go.
I don't know,
Well,
you know.
we'll
And
see.
one,
Let's
and they
watch that.
talk about,
Yeah.
just so you know, securing energy
Right.
resources,
Right.
controlling strategic choke points, preserving dollar hegemony. I always, how do I say that?
Hegemony.
Thank
I
you.
think.
My
Yeah.
daughter
That's
taught me how to say that, hegemony, the impact of sanction, destruction. Anyway, it's sort of interesting. It will be interesting to see, um, you know, how that plays out. And any, I know you're not in the business of predictions, but just in closing, I guess it's hard to predict this unpredictable situation and this unpredictable administration.
yeah.
But Mike, when you look at it, how do you see all this playing out?
Yeah.
I know it's speculation, but I'm just curious if history is your guide, and given all your experience in kind of dealing in foreign policy, what do you sense is going to happen?
That's a hard question. I would just remind everybody watching and listening that we're just in day 3 or 4 of this war. I mean, go back and read your histories of the first week of a war. They're a lot easier to start than end, and they go in very unpredictable ways, including the really big wars. So we're in the early stages of this conflict. But the second thing I would say in closing, I want to end with two hopes. One, our armed forces didn't choose this war. Our president of the United States and his team did. And so now that it's been chosen for them, I hope they achieve their military objectives as best as possible because I want them to succeed. It's not their job to choose the objectives, but it is their job to succeed. I want them to succeed with as few casualties as possible. We've already had casualties, and President Trump, he's going to have to now deal with casualties. This is something new for him. It'll be interesting to see how he deals with that. I know the president I worked for, President Obama, that was the hardest part of his job, dealing with those that lost their lives fighting for our country. Now he's crossed that Rubicon. So I hope
Well,
it's just
just
as
to interject, if history's any guide, I remember reading that President Trump in his first term rarely went to Dover Air Force Base, where fallen soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines would come home in caskets and flag draped caskets. And he just stopped going.
well, he better go now because he chose this war and those soldiers died because of his decision, and he needs to honor and respect their families. That is on him. I hope he rethinks that. But I just my hope is about that. Achieve our objectives with as few casualties as possible. And I just want to say what we started with. The Iranian people deserve better. They have lived under this tyranny, this horrific repressive regime for 4 decades. President Trump promised that he was going to help them. I hope, including non-military ways. We talked before. There are a lot of different ways we can help them without boots on the ground. I just hope that they don't get forgotten because I feel it's like we've already forgotten about the Iranians. It's just about the missiles and the nuclear program and support for terrorism. I got that. But what about the Iranian people? I hope that their tragedy and their future does not get forgotten by us. It won't be by me, but I hope it is not by this administration.
Well, it is an incredible opportunity, and their long term future has to be ensured, Mike, by
Yes.
regime change, right? And now they've already moved away from that.
Yeah.
So if there is not regime change in Iran, you wonder what that future is going to actually look like, right?
Yes. And that to be continued. Let's see what happens, as the president
Okay.
would say.
Thanks,
Great to
Mike.
talk to you as always. Yeah, but let's do it again. Obviously, this story is not going away anytime soon. That I can predict with great certainty.
Well, thanks again for your time. And everyone, thank you so much for watching and for your comments. And we'll be back here tomorrow at, I think, 5 p.m. Eastern Time to do our weekly Substack show. And obviously, we're going to hit on this story pretty hard. So, Mike, great to see you.
See you
Thanks
later.
again.
That was great.
Thanks.
Great
Okay.
conversation.
Thanks,
Yeah.
everyone. Bye.
Bye bye.